The howls of disgust and contempt echoed through the dusty main street of Bandera, Texas, but Catherine James kept her chin high as she carried the mangy mutt in her arms, ignoring the whispers that followed her like shadows. It was 1876, and the small frontier town had little patience for a woman who spent her days collecting strays instead of finding a husband. "There she goes again," Ethel Murphy muttered to the other women gathered outside the general store. "Crazy cat Catherine with another worthless animal. Lord knows she's got more critters than sense." Catherine pretended not to hear as she hurried toward her small cottage at the edge of town. At 24, she was already considered a spinster by most, but she couldn't bring herself to care about such judgments. The abandoned animals of Bandera needed someone to care for them, and if that made her an outcast, so be it. Her modest home sat on a plot of land she'd inherited from her father, a former cavalry officer who died defending a stagecoach from bandits 3 years prior. The cottage itself was unremarkable, but the sprawling yard was a different matter entirely. A hastily constructed fence enclosed what had become a sanctuary for the unwanted and forgotten creatures of Bandera County. "Almost there, little one," she whispered to the trembling dog. Its ribs protruded painfully beneath matted fur, and one eye was swollen shut. She'd found him tied to a hitching post outside the saloon, left to bake in the merciless Texas sun. As Catherine approached her gate, she heard frantic barking. Her collection of rescued dogs, 7 at last, Count sensed her arrival. A chorus of meows joined the cacophony as cats perched on fence posts and windowsills. 2 goats bleated from their pen, and somewhere in the back, her rescued hawk screeched from its mending cage. "Miss James!" Catherine turned to see young Tommy Wilson running toward her, his face flushed with excitement. "There's a man, Miss James. Sheriff Taylor found him out by Coyote Creek. He's been shot real bad." Catherine's heart quickened. "Did they fetch Dr. Miller?" "He's gone to San Antonio. Won't be back till next week. Sheriff says if this fella don't get help soon, he's done for." Catherine hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Tell the sheriff to bring him here." The boy's eyes widened. "But Miss James, folks already talk." "People will always talk, Tommy. Now go, quickly." As the boy raced off, Catherine hurried to prepare. 3 years of tending wounded animals had taught her more about mending flesh and bone than most proper ladies would admit to knowing. She'd just finished setting up her kitchen table as a makeshift operating space when Sheriff Taylor and 2 deputies arrived, carrying a large, unconscious man between them. His clothes were caked with dried blood and dust, and his face was almost unrecognizable beneath dirt and a week's worth of beard. "Found him half dead by the creek," Sheriff Taylor explained as they eased the man onto her table. "No identification, but he's wearing spurs and has the look of a cowhand. Someone bushwhacked him good." Catherine nodded, already assessing the wounds. "I'll need hot water, clean rags, and privacy. Gentlemen," Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Miss James, it ain't proper for an unmarried lady to... Would you prefer to explain to his family that he died because propriety was more important than his life?" Catherine challenged, meeting the sheriff's gaze with steely determination. The sheriff sighed. "I'll post a deputy outside. Town council won't like this, but I reckon they'd like a dead stranger even less." After they departed, Catherine began her work. The man had a gunshot wound to his shoulder and another grazing his side. His breathing was shallow but steady. As she cleaned away the blood and grime, she discovered a strong, handsome face beneath the dirt, a face etched with pain but somehow peaceful in unconsciousness. For 3 days, the stranger hovered between life and death, while Catherine tended his wounds, changed his bandages, and spooned broth between his cracked lips. When she wasn't caring for him, she managed her usual routine, feeding her menagerie of rescued animals, cleaning cages, and applying poultices to their various ailments. On the 4th day, as Catherine was changing the bandage on his shoulder, the man's eyes fluttered open. They were startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Am I dead?" he croaked. Catherine smiled. Not for lack of trying. He attempted to sit up, but fell back with a groan. "Where am I?" "My home in Bandera." She offered him water, which he drank greedily. "I'm Catherine James. Sheriff Taylor found you by Coyote Creek with 2 bullet holes in you." "Jackson Quinn," he replied, his voice gaining strength. Most folks call me Jack." His gaze darted around the room, taking in the unusual sight of a cat sleeping on a chair and a small raccoon watching curiously from atop a bookshelf. "This some kind of menagerie?" "Something like that," Catherine replied, helping him take another sip of water. "Rest now, Mr. Quinn. You've lost a lot of blood." As the days passed, Jack regained his strength. Catherine learned he was a cowboy who'd been driving cattle north when rustlers attacked his party. He'd been separated from his companions during the ensuing gunfight and had no idea if they were alive or dead. "I need to get word to the Diamond R Ranch," he told her one morning as she changed his bandages. "My boss, Mr. Reynolds, will think I'm dead or run off with his cattle money." "You're in no condition to travel," Catherine replied firmly. "I'll send a telegram for you." Jack watched her with curious eyes as she moved about the room, checking on various animals. A three-legged coyote pup hopped over to investigate him, and Catherine quickly scooped it up. "Sorry about that. Copper's too friendly for his own good." "You named a coyote Copper?" "He was caught in a trap. Rancher was going to shoot him, so I offered to take him instead." She stroked the pup's head affectionately. "They're not so different from dogs, really." Jack's lips quirked into a bemused smile. "Most folks around here shoot coyotes on sight." "Most folks around here don't take the time to understand things before they destroy them," she replied, meeting his gaze evenly. The next day, while Catherine was in town sending Jack's telegram, Ethel Murphy and several other town women paid an unexpected visit. Jack, who had managed to move from the bed to a chair by the window, heard their approach. "Catherine James!" Ethel's shrill voice called out. "We know you're harboring that stranger. The ladies' auxiliary has concerns about your moral character." Jack pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the pain in his side. He limped to the door and pulled it open, startling the group of women who stood poised to knock again. "Afternoon, ladies," he said, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "Miss James isn't home, but I'd be happy to convey your concerns about her moral character once she returns from sending a telegram on my behalf." Ethel's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You're Jackson Quinn, madam, of the Diamond R Ranch. Miss James has been kind enough to save my life after I was shot by rustlers. I'd be obliged if you'd allow her to continue doing so without unnecessary disturbances." The women retreated in flustered confusion, but Jack knew the gossip would only intensify. When Catherine returned, he told her about the visit. "I'm used to it," she sighed, unpacking supplies from her basket. "They've never approved of me, especially since I started taking in animals." "Why do you do it?" Jack asked, genuinely curious. "Can't be easy, being ostracized like that." Catherine was quiet for a long moment as she stroked an elderly cat that had jumped into her lap. "My father taught me that all life has value. When he died, I was alone, and these creatures, they were alone too. We found each other." She looked up at him with clear, honest eyes. "Everyone deserves a second chance, don't you think?" The conversation lingered in Jack's mind that night as he lay awake, listening to the sounds of Catherine moving about, tending to her animals before bed. There was something extraordinary about this woman who defied an entire town to follow her convictions. As the days turned into weeks, Jack's strength returned. He helped Catherine with her chores as much as his healing body allowed, finding unexpected satisfaction in repairing a chicken coop or constructing a better enclosure for the hawk, which Catherine was preparing to release back into the wild. One evening, as they sat on her small porch watching the sunset, Jack broke a comfortable silence. "I received a reply from Mr. Reynolds today." Catherine turned to him, her expression carefully neutral. "What did he say?" "The cattle made it to market. My partners are fine. They thought I was dead." Jack hesitated. "He's holding my wages. Says I can come collect them whenever I'm able." "That's wonderful news," Catherine said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You must be eager to get back." Before Jack could respond, they heard the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. A rock sailed through Catherine's front window, followed by shouting from the street. "Animal witch! Town council says you've got 1 week to clear out your filthy beasts." Jack was on his feet in an instant, but Catherine caught his arm. "Don't! It only makes it worse." "This happens often?" Catherine shrugged, but he could see the hurt behind her composed expression. "It comes and goes. Someone's steer probably got loose and trampled their garden. So, naturally, it's my fault for giving animals ideas above their station. Jack frowned. This isn't right, Catherine. It's been this way since I started taking in strays. I'm used to it. Jack studied her face in the fading light. No one should have to get used to being treated this way. The next morning, Jack dressed in his now clean clothes and strapped on his gun belt for the first time since his injury. I'm heading into town, he told Catherine over breakfast. Are you sure you're strong enough? Strong enough for what I have in mind. He hesitated at the door. Trust me? Catherine nodded, curiosity evident in her expression. Jack made his way slowly down the dusty main street of Bandera, aware of the curious stares following his progress. His first stop was the sheriff's office. Sheriff Taylor looked up in surprise. Quinn, good to see you vertical. Sheriff, Jack acknowledged with a nod. I understand the town council has some concerns about Miss James's property. Taylor shifted uncomfortably. Some folks think she's harboring dangerous animals. There's talk of rabies, livestock being threatened. Interesting, considering most of her animals would be dead if not for her care. Jack leaned forward. I've spent weeks there now. Those animals are better behaved than half the people in this town. Be that as it may, the sheriff sighed, the council's made up their mind. Then I'd like to address this council. The emergency meeting of the Bandera Town Council was hastily convened that afternoon. Jack stood before the 5 men, his stance wide despite the lingering pain in his side. Gentlemen, he began, I understand you have concerns about Catherine James and her animals. Mayor Harrison, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, cleared his throat. Mr. Quinn, while we appreciate your perspective, Miss James has been a thorn in this town's side for some time. Her refusal to conform to proper feminine behavior. So, this isn't about safety at all, Jack interrupted. It's about a woman who doesn't fit your idea of what a woman should be. Now see here, began another councilman. No, you see here, Jack countered. That woman saved my life when your town doctor was away. She spent years helping creatures no one else cares about. And how do you repay her? With rocks through her window? Mayor Harrison had the decency to look embarrassed. That was unfortunate, but nothing, Jack cut in. I was riding for the Diamond R Ranch when I was shot. Perhaps you've heard of it, or of its owner, Robert Reynolds? The men exchanged glances. The Diamond R was one of the largest cattle operations in Texas. Mr. Reynolds is quite fond of Miss James's humanitarian efforts. In fact, Jack continued smoothly, he's considering establishing a proper animal hospital here in Bandera, with Miss James overseeing operations. It would bring considerable business to your town. This was, of course, a complete fabrication, but Jack had spent enough time playing poker to keep his expression earnest and convincing. However, he added, if Miss James were to be forced out over such petty concerns, I'm certain Mr. Reynolds would reconsider his investment. By the time Jack left the town hall, the council had not only rescinded their eviction notice, but had also agreed to donate lumber for proper animal enclosures on Catherine's property. When he returned to her cottage and explained what he'd done, she stared at him in disbelief. You lied to the town council? Jack, when they discover the truth. By then, I'll have spoken with Mr. Reynolds. He's a reasonable man with a soft spot for animals himself. Once I explain the situation, I believe he'll see the benefits of such an arrangement. Catherine shook her head, a reluctant smile playing at her lips. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Can it be both? Jack grinned. As summer gave way to autumn, Jack's audacious plan began to take shape. True to his word, he'd written to Robert Reynolds, who was indeed intrigued by the prospect of establishing goodwill in the communities where his cattle drives passed. While not as grand as Jack had promised the town council, Reynolds agreed to fund basic improvements to Catherine's property to create a proper animal sanctuary. The town's attitude began to shift as well, when Catherine successfully treated the mayor's prized hunting dog after it was gored by a wild boar. Even Ethel Murphy had to grudgingly acknowledge her skills. Jack delayed his return to the Diamond R, finding one reason after another to remain in Bandera. He helped build new enclosures, repaired Catherine's roof before the winter rains, and accompanied her on rescue missions when farmers reported injured wildlife. One crisp October evening, they sat by a small fire in Catherine's yard. watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The animals were settled for the night, creating a peaceful backdrop of gentle sounds. "I received another letter from Mr. Reynolds today," Jack said quietly. Catherine tensed beside him. These announcements had become harbingers of change, and she'd grown accustomed to Jack's presence in a way that made her heart ache at the thought of his departure. "He's offered me a position as foreman at his new ranch near Austin," Jack continued. "It would mean more money, more responsibility." "That's wonderful," Catherine replied, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "You deserve it." Jack turned to look at her, firelight dancing across his features. "I haven't decided whether to accept." Catherine's heart fluttered traitorously. "Why ever not?" "It's a tremendous opportunity. Because there's something here in Bandera that's become more important to me than any job." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Catherine, these past months have changed me. Watching you fight for these creatures, seeing your compassion in action, it's made me see the world differently." She stared at him, afraid to hope. "What are you saying, Jack?" "They mocked you for saving strays," he said softly. "But then you saved me too. Not just my life, but my understanding of what really matters." He squeezed her hand gently. "I love you, Catherine James. I love your stubborn heart and your gentle hands and the way you see value in things others discard." Tears sprang to Catherine's eyes. "Jack, I know it's sudden," he hurried on. "And I know I have nothing to offer except myself. But I thought maybe if you felt something too, we could build something here together. Your sanctuary, my strength, partners." Catherine laughed through her tears. "Nothing to offer? Jack Quinn, you've stood up for me when no one else would. You've worked beside me without complaint. You've truly seen me when everyone else in this town looked right through me." She leaned forward, courage rising within her. "Yes, I feel something too. Something I never expected to feel." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Jack's eyes shone with a hope so bright it took Catherine's breath away. "So," he whispered, "what happens now?" "Now," Catherine replied with a smile, "you write to Mr. Reynolds and tell him you're declining his offer because you found something better in Bandera." 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning that dawned clear and cool, Catherine James and Jackson Quinn were married in a small ceremony attended by a handful of townsfolk and an impressive array of animals kept at a respectable distance by temporary fencing. Robert Reynolds himself attended, having ridden from Austin to see the union of his trusted cowhand and the remarkable woman who'd captured his heart. His wedding gift was the deed to an additional 10 acres adjoining Catherine's property, along with funds to establish what would become the first animal hospital in Bandera County. "Never seen a wedding quite like this," Reynolds commented to Sheriff Taylor as a rehabilitated hawk was released during the ceremony, soaring into the blue Texas sky as a symbol of new beginnings. "Nothing conventional about those two," Taylor replied with a chuckle, "but I reckon they suit each other just fine." Winter passed in a blur of contentment as Catherine and Jack settled into married life. The sanctuary grew, both in physical size and in the town's estimation. Children began to visit after school, eager to help feed the animals and hear Catherine's stories about each rescue. Even Ethel Murphy eventually succumbed to the charm of a 3-legged cat that Jack had found abandoned in a mining camp. In the spring of 1877, as wildflowers carpeted the Texas hill country, Catherine made a discovery that brought both joy and trepidation. "Jack," she said one evening as they sat on their expanded porch watching the sunset, "there's going to be another addition to our sanctuary." He glanced at her, brow furrowed. "Did you find another animal in town today?" Catherine took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "This one's a bit different." Jack's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "Catherine, are you saying—" She nodded, tears of happiness brimming in her eyes. "By winter we'll have a child." Jack whooped with joy, lifting her from her chair and spinning her in a careful circle before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. "A baby," he whispered against her lips. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Our life is already so full with the sanctuary." Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Jack assured her, cupping her face in his hands. This child will grow up surrounded by more love and compassion than most people see in a lifetime. They'll learn from you. Catherine learned to see the value in all living things. As her pregnancy progressed, Catherine found herself surrounded by unexpected support. Women who had once whispered behind her back now brought handmade baby clothes and offered advice. The town's new doctor, hired with assistance from Reynolds, made regular house calls to check on her health. Seems your sanctuary has expanded to include more than just animals, Jack observed after the ladies' auxiliary organized a surprise gathering to present Catherine with a handcrafted cradle. People can change, Catherine replied, leaning against his solid strength. Sometimes they just need someone to show them a different way of seeing things. In December of 1877, as the first snow-dusted Bandera in a rare winter storm, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named James Robert Quinn, honoring both Catherine's father and their benefactor. Little James grew into a curious, compassionate child who toddled after his parents as they tended to their ever-changing collection of animals. By his third birthday, he could recite the specific needs of each creature and solemnly helped his mother apply medicines and bandages with tiny, careful hands. The Bandera Animal Sanctuary, as it came to be known, grew into a respected institution. Veterinarians from as far away as Dallas came to study Catherine's techniques for wildlife rehabilitation. Jack managed the business aspects, his natural charm and honest manner winning over skeptics and securing donations from wealthy ranchers. In the summer of 1880, as Catherine watched Jack teaching 4-year-old James how to approach an injured deer without frightening it, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a lonely woman mocked for her compassion to the matriarch of a thriving family and sanctuary, it seemed almost like a dream. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jack asked, joining her on the porch after tucking James into bed. "I was just thinking about how different my life would be if Sheriff Taylor hadn't found you by that creek," she admitted, nestling against him as he sat beside her. Jack kissed the top of her head. "I think about that too, how close I came to bleeding out there, alone." "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked softly. "Giving up the foreman position, tying yourself to a woman with an unusual calling?" Jack chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Regret the best decision I ever made? Not for a single moment." He tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "Catherine Quinn, you and this sanctuary are my home. You took a broken, half-dead cowboy and gave him purpose. You showed me that the strongest person in Bandera wasn't the man who could win a bar fight, it was the woman brave enough to stand against an entire town for what she believed in." Catherine smiled up at him, her heart full. "We saved each other, I think. And a whole lot of creatures besides," Jack added with a grin. As twilight deepened into night, they sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the symphony of sounds from their sanctuary, the gentle nickering of rescued horses, the soft hooting of a convalescing owl, the distant howl of Copper, the coyote who had never quite taken to the wild again. In the nursery, James slept peacefully, surrounded by handmade stuffed animals crafted by the very townswomen who had once shunned his mother. On his wall hung a framed article from the San Antonio Express, featuring the Quinn family and their groundbreaking work in animal conservation work that was changing attitudes across Texas. Catherine leaned her head against Jack's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest acts of salvation come disguised as simple kindness, and that love, like a rescued animal, grows strongest when given the freedom to flourish on its own terms. "We should get some rest," Jack murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Tommy Wilson is bringing that injured mountain lion at first light." Catherine smiled. "Just another day at the sanctuary. Just another perfect day," Jack corrected, leading his wife inside their home, a home built on compassion, defended by courage, and sustained by a love that had transformed not just 2 lives, but an entire community's understanding of what it meant to truly care for all of God's creatures.